everyone, it's Shadow the Rat, and in this video I wanted to talk about the three main methods for introducing strange rats. These methods are the neutral territory method, the carrier method, and the glove method. Now before we begin, I want to talk about the biggest mistake new owners often make when trying to introduce new rats, and that is to try and introduce them in their current rat's cage. Now this is one of the worst ways to introduce new rats simply because rats are territorial creatures, and if they find a new rat in their territory, chances are they will attack. My best analogy for this would be if you came home one day to find a stranger sleeping in your bed. Most people would react really poorly to this, and well, you can't really blame them, and rats are no different. Of course, there are always exceptions, but when in doubt, it's best to avoid it. Okay, so for our first method, I thought I'd go over the neutral territory method. This method is probably the most commonly used one, and is the one you'll probably be the most familiar with. To start, you'll want to find an area that neither of your rats has frequented much. This can be something like a dry bathtub, a bed, a couch, a table, or any place your rats aren't familiar with. A free-range area can also work in some cases, however, because rats tend to scent mark everything, they may become territorial in this area, and it's best to avoid it. Now, the way this method works is pretty simple. You just take your new and old rats to your neutral area of choice, and then let them loose. Don't include any toys or such, and instead just let the rats interact. You can also try scattering treats around, however it may cause extra aggression in some rats. After several successful introductions in a neutral territory where the rats display positive behavior towards each other, you can strip down the current rat's cage, clean everything thoroughly, rearrange everything, and finally add in all of the rats. Now the pros of this method are that the empty neutral territory gives the rats less reasons to fight. The larger space also helps to ensure that rats can get away from each other and interact at their own pace. On the other hand, the cons of this method are that since most rat injuries tend to occur when one rat is running away from another, there is a higher chance that the fighting rats might injure each other. This method also tends to take several sessions just because the larger space gives the rats more distractions. Finally, in some cases you will get rats who don't feel quite comfortable together yet don't want to engage each other, and in these cases the rats might completely ignore each other, something which is allowed by the larger open space. Now some tips for introducing rats this way are to try and end each session with something positive. You don't want to remove your rats when they are stressed, as that will just create a negative association with the other rats. Instead, if you find your rats are getting stressed, try to offer something liquid like meat baby food or any sort of liquid treat. While some foods can make certain rats more hostile, lickable treats like this encourage everyone to join in. And if you want, you can even try slathering some liquid treats onto each rat to encourage them to groom each other. Try not to be discouraged if things don't go perfectly during the first few intros. Sometimes it will take multiple sessions over days or even weeks to successfully introduce the rats. Now let's move on to the carrier method. To perform the carrier method, you will need 3 cages. One should be a small carrier such as a 5-gallon critter keeper. The second should be a medium-sized cage like my 10-gallon wire hamster cage. Finally, your third cage should be whatever cage you plan on housing all the rats in permanently. Now once you have all your supplies, you want to add bedding and food to your carrier, along with some water and all the rats you want to introduce. After that, you just leave them and let them be, letting them work it out in this small space. Now once your rats are doing well together in this small carrier, it's time to move to the medium cage. Again, you want it to be empty aside from the bedding, scattered food, and water. And once they're doing fine in this empty medium cage, you can add in some open flat toys like hammocks. These prevent any of the rats from becoming cornered and injured. Now once your rats are doing fine with these flat toys, you can add in some enclosed toys. And once your rats are doing well in the medium cage with enclosed toys, you want to deep clean your largest cage and start all over. Again, start with the larger cage being completely empty other than bedding, scattered food, and water. Once your rats do fine in the large empty cage, you want to add in open flat toys, and once they do well with those, you want to finally add in their enclosed toys. Now the pros to this method are that since rats tend to dislike fighting in a small place, the carrier method can be helpful in preventing some conflicts. The size of the area also helps encourage the rats to acknowledge each other and interact, and the stress of such a small cage can also encourage the rats to bond quicker, although this process can still take days or weeks in some cases. Now the cons to this method are that if the rats do end up fighting, it's difficult to get them out quickly. This method is also quite stressful on the rats themselves due to the lack of space and free range during the entire bonding process. Some tips on using the carrier method to introduce your rats would be if you have a more confrontational rat in your group, or if the rats you're trying to introduce are shy, you might want to consider introducing your own rats one by one. Start with the most gentle rat in your group, and once the new rat or rats get used to them, add in your second most gentle rat, and so on. By doing it in this way, you can inspire confidence in the new rat, something which is especially important if you are introducing just one rat and not a pair or group. You also don't want to free range during the entire bonding process, as this can disrupt any progress you've made so far. Once your rats are living in the large cage with enclosed toys, only then do you want to start free-ranging the rats again. Finally, let's move on to the glove method. The glove method of introductions is almost like a combination of the previous two methods, with a few extra pieces. Basically, when doing a glove method introduction, you take the new rats and place them in a medium-sized neutral cage with no toys inside. You will then slip on a glove, and this is what you'll be using to help direct your rats' interactions. When they are being friendly towards each other, that's when you want to just sit back and let them interact. But should they start to act aggressive, you want to intervene before they can scare or hurt each other. You'll then continue short sessions of letting the rats interact in this medium cage until they begin to display more positive interactions such as grooming. Then you can deep clean your large cage, redecorate it, and then let all the rats live in it together. Now, in terms of pros, when used correctly, this method can be a great way at giving less confident rats more confidence around their new friends. It's also a great way to curb any serious fights, especially for more confrontational rats, as you will be right there with your glove preventing any of these negative interactions from occurring. Because of this, the rats should start to form a positive relationship with each other and need less and less blocking until they can finally live together. Now, the cons to this method are that to use it effectively, you need to have a good idea of what rat behaviors mean. If you misinterpret behaviors and block the rats more than necessary, you can actually cause more conflict as the rats get frustrated from not being able to interact. While rats do communicate with vocalizations somewhat, a big part of their communication is physical and requires being able to directly interact. So if you prevent this, you can actually prevent or slow the process of bonding. Some tips and tricks for if you do this method are to not block the rats too much. Yes, you want to prevent any serious fighting, but rats do tend to be pretty physical when interacting, so forced grooming and such is natural and to be expected. You also want to try and end every session on a positive note. I'd recommend doing something like feeding a liquid treat off a flat plate so that the rats can engage in the social activity of eating together and then have that as their last experience with the other rats. Now that we've gone over the 3 methods of introduction, I wanted to go over some behaviors you might see and how you can interpret them. Sniffing, wrestling, pinning, and squeaking are all normal during intros and are signs of the rats getting to know each other and establishing their hierarchy. Piloerection, when the fur stands up straight, and sidling, where the rats walk sideways towards each other, are slightly more serious signs than wrestling, but not necessarily bad. Nonetheless, if your rats are exhibiting these signs, keep a close eye on them in case things escalate. If your rats stand up straight, arms out, and facing each other, this is known as boxing. This, along with a louder and shrilled squeaking or a hissing noise, is another sign of a more serious aggression, but not necessarily a point at which they must be separated. Still, you'll want to keep an eye on them just to make sure things don't escalate further. Now, for more aggressive signs, look for fur being pulled out or rats aiming rough bites at the rump. If you are seeing these behaviors, you really want to slow down intros and perhaps give the rats some time apart before trying again. Finally, the worst behaviors to see would be the rat ball, when the rats tumble head over heels, tackling each other and fighting all out, or any cases where the rat draws blood. While these are not a good sign, if you choose to continue intros, you'll want to go at a much slower pace. To wrap this up, I wanted to go over some tips and tricks for introductions in general. Now, the first thing is, of course, to never introduce inside the main cage. I went over this at the beginning, but this is because rats are territorial and you really don't want to give them any more reason to fight. In terms of which rats are easier to introduce, young rats under 12 weeks are going to be quite easy to introduce to other young rats, and rats between 8 and 12 weeks are also going to be fairly easy to introduce to adults. So if you have a solo older rat and plan on continuing to have more rats, this is a good way to increase your chance of an easier intro. Now, you do want to be careful when introducing rats under 8 weeks to older rats, as while older rats usually get along with babies pretty well, they can also harm these babies fairly easily. Another good thing to do is to consider doing short but sweet sessions instead of super long ones when doing neutral territory or glove method intros. If you have a male rat who's behaving seriously aggressive towards his new companions, consider getting him neutered and then waiting 2 weeks or so before introducing again, as it might just be hormonal aggression which needs a neuter to fix. If you have a female rat, on the other hand, who is giving you issues introduction-wise, consider waiting until she or one of the other girls is in heat. Being in heat tends to make introductions much easier and is a great way to introduce difficult female rats. Finally, you want to do introductions using the method you are most comfortable with. And also, don't expect your rats to get along right away. As I said before, it usually takes several sessions until the rats are ready to live together. And just remember that even if one introduction method doesn't work, another one might. I know in my case, I initially tried to introduce my older rat Shadow with 2 12-week-old rats using the neutral territory method. But when this resulted in fur pulling and piloerection along with hissing, I ended up switching to the carrier method, after which things went much more smoothly. That's all I have for you today, and I hope it was useful. If you have any other tips or success stories you'd like to share, feel free to do so in the comments below. For more rat care or rat trick training tips, feel free to visit my website at www.rattricks.weebly.com, link in the description. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!